Hi everyone, this is Mary, you're on Mary Reads. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about 10 classic books that I think everybody should read at least once in their life. Obviously, when we're talking about classics, the more you read, the better, the more perspective you get, the more interesting plot lines you learn, the more you learn about the topic that's covered. I just think in general, classics should be read. But I just thought of 10 books that I personally really liked and that I think a lot of people would like. And if you don't know about these classics, if you want to get into reading classics, I think these are the books that you can start with. We're going to go through multiple countries here. I decided to make it a little bit more interesting. So we're going to go through multiple countries. It's going to be the US. It's going to be Great Britain, it's going to be France, it's going to be Russia, Turkey, and Colombia. So we're going to have 10 books from these 6 countries, and please let me know if you find anything interesting or if maybe you have other favorite classical books from those countries that you think people should read. First of all, let's think about what the classical book is. What is the definition of classics? Classical books are those that stood the test of time. These are the books that we are still reading through generations. These are the books that were so well written that we learn about them and we read them no matter how much time has passed. The classical books can be of various different genres. It can be poetry, it can be nonfiction, it can be fiction. And when I'm talking about fiction, it can be a Gothic novel, it can be what we would call a romance novel. It can be a family saga, it can be a becoming of age novel. So it's a lot of different genres. Now, how do we know exactly that the book is classic? What characteristics are there? If we see a book, how do we know if it's classic or not? The first criteria is that it talks about universal topics like life, death, love, maybe friendship, morality. In some cases, money is very much tied to morality. So these are the topics that people all over the world understand, people all over the world experience in one way or another. These are all the topics that the classical literature discusses. And as I mentioned before, not only people from different countries would be reading these books and understanding them, also people in different times would understand them. So for example, if Leo Tolstoy wrote about friendship 200 years ago, I can still read his book, and yes, some of the things obviously change. We don't live the same way we lived 200 years ago, but the concept of friendship stayed the same or very much the same. We still have friends. He had friends. He wrote about his characters having friends, and I have friends, so I'm able to relate. And this is something that classical literature does. It brings together people from not only different countries and nationalities and religions and race and whatever, but also people from different times and generations. Classical books also have a certain level of complexity, the complexity and the beauty of the language. It's obviously hard to distinguish exactly which word is beautiful enough and which one is not, and which book is complex enough and which one is not. And if the book is super complex and we have one long word on another, does it mean that the book is classical? So it's kind of hard to distinguish and set boundaries in here. But in general, this is literature that would be written in a more complex, more varied language. Now let's move on to the books. And the first country that we are going to look at is the United States. And the first book that I have already mentioned here multiple times before is Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. I love this book with all my heart. It was painful, it was beautiful, it was very enlightening. I was postponing reading this book for like 5 years, and then at some point I was sitting there thinking, you know what, I should finally read the book. and I did, and I couldn't understand why it took me so long to take this book. I've read it in Russian the first time I read it. Now I got it in English, and I'm thinking about rereading it. I love reading the book in its original language if I can. So I read it last year, and I'm planning on reading it this year if I have time. So this is basically how much I love it. This is a story about a girl. She's in her late teens. She comes to Chicago to live with her sister, and she is starting to earn money. She has her own American dream that she wants to achieve. She wants certain things from this life that she cannot get yet. So she starts working at a factory, and after that, soon after that, she becomes a mistress of a wealthy and well-known gentleman. And this is how her story starts. This is how the story begins. There's a lot to say about this book, but one main thing that fascinated me is how a person can rise very fast, and as fast as they can rise, they can fall. We will be looking at both. We will be looking at a person rising. We will be looking at a person falling. And Dreiser paints it so well in his book that it's just so heartbreaking and it's so emotional. I loved this book so much. The novel actually got a lot of controversy at its time, and critics and censors were attacking this novel for its immorality, but today it's a very known classic. The second book that I want to talk about by an American author is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And this is a very, very sad story, a very painful story. When I read it, I didn't know what I was getting into. And when I finished the book, I realized that maybe I was not fully prepared for it, and maybe I should have waited a little bit longer. But nevertheless, the story is very beautiful. The story is tragic. The story is about friendship and hardships of life. So it talks about two people. They are farmers and they are friends. They kind of go together. George and Lenny. Lenny is mentally disabled, and George promised to take care of him. So Lenny cannot really operate very well without George being there and helping him. So they both dream about one thing. They want to own their own land and have their farm. It's a time of Great Depression, so people are starving, people do not have jobs, and of course having a farm would solve both of these issues, and this is their dream. So they come to a farm of this wealthy wealthy farmer, to work there, and they're hoping to save money to buy their own land. Of course, it doesn't go as planned, and there is a lot that's awaiting our main characters, but this is kind of the beginning of the book. This is how the story starts. This book was also banned because people were claiming it was using offensive language, and then there were a bunch of other issues that people wanted to ban it for. But again, today we know it as one of probably the main classic American books. Now let's move to Great Britain. Let's move to English classics. I love English classics. That's what I grew up reading, and I really, really much enjoy them. I didn't want to put Jane Austen here. Obviously, Jane Austen is an amazing author. I love all of her novels. I've read all of them. I'm planning on rereading some of them this fall, but I wanted to go for something a little bit different this time. So the first novel is Middlemarch by George Eliot, and this novel discusses the complex relationships between people in the pretty enclosed society. It's a small village. People know each other. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's secrets. People are gossiping. So this is kind of the place we are going to be in. And there will be many characters, so I can't really name one main character. Probably the ones that we will be talking the most about is Dorothea Brooke and Dr. Lydgate. Dorothea Brooke has very idealistic ideas. She only wants to marry a man who does something, you know, who has a bigger purpose, maybe somebody who wants to change the world, maybe somebody who is connected to religion and discusses this religion with people and helps them learn something. So she's a very idealistic young woman. And Dr. Lydgate is a very ambitious doctor who wants to change the world of medicine, who has his own opinions, and who is trying to kind of change the village we're going to be in. And here we will be discussing topics like love, like friendship, ambition, marriage, development of character. This book is just filled with a lot of interesting topics that you can discuss. And I really enjoyed it. I was reading it for one of my classes in university, and it was a revelation to me. I've never encountered Eliot's books before, and this was the first one I read by her. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to reading more of her books. And the next book in our British part of the literature is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. People have very different opinions of Charles Dickens. Somebody likes his books a lot, somebody doesn't like them, they don't like the style, something is a little weird. For me, these books are kind of heavy. I have to admit that they are a little bit dense for me. But I'm still interested in reading more of his novels. I do not want to just stop reading them. I've read 4 or 5 probably, but I have so much more to explore, and I'm very excited about that. But this particular novel talks about an orphan boy who lives with his older sister and her husband. His older sister is quite abusive, both to him and her husband. But the husband is this very kind, very understanding blacksmith, and he kind of, our main character, Pip, kind of has a connection with this man, at least more of a connection than with his sister. At some point, Pip becomes a protege of this older woman. She lives a very secluded life. She is kind of lonely and actually a little bit creepy. And she has a daughter that she adopted a long time ago. So when Pip gets this inheritance from an anonymous source, he thinks that it's coming from this lady. She wants Pip to kind of inherit money she has, and she wants him to marry this adopted daughter. He moves to London to become a gentleman with his new inherited money, but his life changes completely, and his great expectations change completely when he realizes that nothing is as it is, when he finds out who the money is coming from and who his first love, this adopted daughter, actually is, and what she actually wants. This story is kind of creepy. It did give me chills sometimes. It's very, very dark. It's painted in these dark grays and blacks, but it's a very impressive story, and I definitely think that if you are getting into Charles Dickens, this might be the novel to, if not start with, but at least read it somewhere close to beginning. I think you will get the taste of Dickens very well from this book. Let's move to Russian classics. I can talk about Russian classics for hours. That's something that I've been reading in school from the 2nd grade to the last one. And this is definitely something I know probably the most about. But today I didn't want to talk about Crime and Punishment and War and Peace, just because these are the main ones. If you Google what 2 books should I read from Russian classics, these are the ones that are going to come out. So I'm sure you know about those. I wanted to go slightly deeper and give you the books that you might not have heard of. So the first one I did talk about, and I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about repeating, but I feel like this book should be talked about much more than it does. And it's Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And this is the book that I showed to my husband. He loved it. We're reading it together. And I think that it's really something that a lot of people would enjoy, but they just don't know about this book. This is a story about a devil coming to Moscow, and there are actually 3 stories kind of embedded into this one book. They're all intertwined, they're all connected, And again, the first one is about Devil and his kind of team, his entourage coming to Moscow, to this society where people are officially atheists. And obviously seeing a devil there does not correspond with their worldviews. The second story is about Pontius Pilate and what role he played in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So we have this kind of a more historical part of the story. And finally, we have the last story about a master who is a writer, and he goes mad after he sees the criticism of his work. But he has this devoted lover who is with him no matter what, Margarita. And this is what the book kind of takes its name from, Master and Margarita. The book has so many levels. I really want to make a separate lecture about this book at some point, but I don't even know what to start with. People study this book for many, many months, and you definitely need multiple reads to fully understand what it's about. But I'm really hoping that one day I will know enough about it to make a full video. And the next book from Russian classics is called Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov. And this book is talking about the nobility of 19th century Russia. So it is a satire on this world of nobility, on this class in Russia. And we focus on our main character, a nobleman who is lazy, apathetic. He's more interested in his own dreams and thoughts than in the real world. And he is kind of mirrored, contradicted by his friend, this young and energetic doctor who is trying to push him to do more, to get out to the society, to kind of change his life and move, be more present in this world. So these two characters will be representing, one of them, our nobleman, a decaying nobility of Russia of 19th century, and our doctor will be representing this new generation with new worldviews. I found this book fascinating. I really enjoyed it. It's kind of like you are getting through, you know how the caramel is kind of soft, and you're touching it, and the cooler it gets, the more sticky it becomes, and it's not as easy to get out. So this is how I felt about this book. It's kind of sticky. You get into it and you are in this very, very stagnant place, and it's hard to move on. And once you start reading about our doctor character that kind of represents new generation, it all changes and you feel differently. So I loved this kind of a swing in between this stagnant and slow pace and our fast and energetic one. Now let's move to the French classics, and here I probably didn't choose the most obvious ones. Like, I did not put the Hunchback of Notre Dame here, and I did not put some of the books that I probably could, but I put the ones that I think are kind of in two very different genres and that I think are interesting, and they would be cool to get into French classics. And the first one is The Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. And this book is talking about a scientist who found a way to get into the center of the Earth. He found those tubes in volcanoes that will help you get right into the middle of the Earth. So this book is for those who love science fiction and adventure. So our scientist decides to have an expedition to that place. He takes his nephew and a guide, and they start their very dangerous but a very exciting journey. They are gonna meet the prehistoric animals and creatures. They are gonna get into some natural disasters. There are gonna be things that they are not even going to be able to explain. And this is such an interesting world. There is also a movie that I think you can watch. It's very, very cool. I first loved the movie and then I realized that it was based on a book. I saw the movie when I was a kid. And I really think that if you want to get into classical literature and if you want something lighter, this is definitely the author that you should go with. The next novel from the French classical literature is The Red and the Black by Stendhal, and this novel is a portrait of a young man. He wants to detach from his provincial background, he wants to rise, he wants to become a somebody. And so he uses his wit, he uses his intelligence to find a place in this higher society of France that is actually very much separated by classes and by the political views. This novel is kind of a critique of the French society, its materialism and its hypocrisy. I loved the book when I was reading it, but it was a very long time ago, so I'm actually thinking about rereading it sometime soon. But it's definitely a very, very interesting and curious novel. Now let's move to Colombian classics. And by now, maybe you've guessed that I'm going to be talking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez and his 100 Years of Solitude. I've got this book from the library 4 years ago, maybe 5, and I didn't really realize what I was getting into, and only later I understood that I was actually reading my first magical realism novel, which was extremely exciting. This is a family saga that talks about multiple generations of the same family, Buendia, and the book is talking about the cycle of life, the nature of life, and how the solitude impacts our life. And the last book is going to be a Turkish classic, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pronounce the name of the author correctly, but this book is called The Wren, and it's written by Risat Nuri Güntekin. And this is a book about a girl, Faraday, that mostly is talked about in the way of diaries. So she's writing a diary. And in this 20th century novel, we are going to be talking about her life. So it's basically going to be a diary that walks us through, if not all of her life, then most of it. So we start from her being a little girl. She is an orphan girl who lives with her uncle, her aunt, and her sisters and brothers, well, her cousins. In winters, during the school year, she studies in this lyceum, and summers she spends with her family. And everybody's calling her the Wren because of her energy and mischief. And she is supposed to be marrying her cousin, Kimran, but she leaves, she runs away the day before the wedding when she finds out that he was not faithful to her. And this is when our second part of the book starts, the biggest section. It's also written as her diaries. And this section tells us about her becoming a teacher. She's going to Anatolia. She starts teaching kids, but she has to go through a bunch of different hardships. But she manages to survive, manages to get through them. And then we get to the final part of the book that is told from the third person. And here we find out about the rest of her life, how the story finishes. So these were all the books. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, if you've enjoyed them, or if maybe there are books that you think would be better for beginning reading the classical literature of any particular country. Thank you for watching this video and being with me today. I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.